Okay, I think we're good.
Ready?
Yes.
It is 4:02 on January 21st. Go ahead and call this workshop to order. Joe, if you want to call the roll for us, please.
Sure. Commissioner Snow,
Here.
Commissioner Curry,
Here.
Commissioner Delanoy,
Here.
Commissioner Johnson,
Here.
Mayor Penny.
Here. So just for the audience, this is a workshop of your city commission. There'll be no formal actions taken tonight. There won't be any votes. The purpose of a workshop is for the commission to interact with the staff collectively. Each one of us meet individually with staff, but we can never meet in the same room discussing city topics because of the Sunshine Law. So there won't be any time for public participation this evening. It'll just be communications. You guys can observe what's going on. If we do come to consensus before there's any formal action taken by the city commission, it'll come back at a publicly noticed meeting, and then you'll have your chance to comment at that time. At any time, if you'd like to contact any one of us individually, after the meeting, before the meeting, all of our cell phones are on our cards. Feel free to do that. Just in the spirit of time, we have workshops because this is a 2-hour topic. We try not to have these lengthy discussions at our regular city commission meetings. So most of the answers will be given tonight. Might be a lot of questions and some answers, but we'll come to consensus, and then staff will bring it back as a formal action at a regular city commission meeting. So that's the purpose of this meeting today. So Joe, you want to go ahead and kick us off?
I wanted to see if you want to go out of, I don't know if there is a specific order, but we have 3 things to talk about tonight. One is the vulnerability assessment. The other is the direction moving forward with the Waste Pro renewal or rebidding. And the third is rezoning of parcel 4 on the, what we'll call the Fountainhead project. 2 of those are going to be rather quick discussions, and then if we want to just do those and kind of get them out of the way, we can then focus on the stormwater concerns.
Okay, unless anyone has any objection. I don't think we have a formal agenda, we just had the items.
Yeah.
listed.
All right, so let me jump on to the question about Waste Pro and the extension. If you remember last year, we went through the process. We hired Bill Redmond to work with us to negotiate contract renewal terms with Waste Pro. We got to a certain point where there was quite a bit of uncertainty, and there were other cities that were going out for bid last year, so we wanted to wait and see what those bids came back at. So now here we are a year later, and I'm looking to get some direction from the commission to see what process you want me to go through. I did meet with Bill Redmond briefly this week just for an informal conversation. And, really there's nothing new to the discussion with Bill. He did provide us some additional information. If you remember last year, we talked about a $2.50 increase across the board for our residential collection. And we will continue to have that same 30% markup. And that would be for a certain number of years. And the one thing that really has come back this year in our conversation was the discussion of recycling. So there's a cost to recycling, and actually the recycling costs are much higher than the regular collection costs. And there's no money in recycling like it used to be maybe 10 or 15 years ago when China was buying all the recycling from the U.S. and we were getting rid of it and actually making money. Well, now it costs several times what it costs us to process regular trash that's going into the landfill. So I would like to reach back out to Waste Pro. There's a person that does the contract negotiations around here, who's our district coordinator, but I want to reach back out to Tim. Tim is kind of at a much higher level now. I think he oversees the whole Southeast United States. But I still want to reach out to him because I have a relationship with him and get that conversation started and request that we have a sit-down discussion and talk about the rates moving forward. I want him to explain to me what the market rate has been in this area for our surrounding cities, and if we can get a price for what it would be if we extended the contract for the additional 2 years that we have, plus 10 on top of it. So it would be a total of a 12-year contract. And is there a benefit to that? Will we save a little bit more on the front end that will last a little bit longer than if we were going to go out to bid for the whole thing? So if that's your direction, I'll go ahead and reach out to Tim, and I'll try to get that conversation started. I do want to be able to use Bill Redmond a little bit for some of the information that we do need. He does put some things together, but for the most part, Michelle in our finance department does create a lot of the data and the spreadsheets, and then Bill kind of manipulates it into a couple of different scenarios. So if I need to reach back out to Bill, we'll go ahead and do that. If that's the direction I have to go in with him, I might have to do a new contract with him for the negotiations portions of this. But I want to get your feedback and see what your thoughts are at this point.
Have any other cities had their contracts renewed since we since we
Yes,
spoke?
a couple of them. I mean, I read an article just about a couple weeks ago that said Waste Pro just had like a $900 million contract renewals this past year between renewals and new contracts. So, you know, they're in it to win it. You know, they've got a lot of contracts that are out there. If you recall, this is a chart that we looked at last year, which is really not a favorable chart to look at because it's not an apples to apples comparison. So, for example, Daytona Beach, which is very low on this chart, they pay their own landfill costs, where most of the other cities, the landfill cost is wrapped up in the contract. Some of the cities have a once-a-week sidearm collection, where other cities like Holly Hill, we have twice-a-week collection plus one-time recycling plus one-time debris hauling and one-time bulk. So there's different scenarios. Not everybody's contract is the same. So it's tough to look at something like this and go, well, you know, we want to be here. So again, and we knew this last year, that Palm Coast and Flagler County both have rates at over $32. I would suspect our rate, which right now on this chart shows us at $18 and change, but this also doesn't reflect increases that we've had, so even this number is a bit lower than what it really is. I would suspect that our numbers are going to come back somewhere in the mid-20s, mid to late $20 range. So that's what I expect. I certainly don't want to be in the $30 range, but I do want to see what other cities have negotiated or what their bids were. But again, a flat bid is not necessarily consistent with the collection rates of what the collection process that we have here in Holly Hill.
What's the increase? Is there an increase of, I mean, I'm sure there is, there's always an increase. Is it from
For-
like, what the,
We have 2 years left in this contract.
oh, we do?
Yeah, our contract expires in April of 2027. I think it's April of 27.
okay.
No, it might go to October. It might go to October 27. So the thought is we either wait this out for the 2 years, year and a half, and we go out and we bid it, we put it out on the street, and we get competitive bids from all these solid waste haulers that will service this area. One train of thought is that becomes competitive, but they all kind of know where the ballpark numbers are going to be, and it might be at the upper end of the $20 range to the lower end of the $30 range. Another thought is that if we could renegotiate an extension to this contract, a 10-year extension to the contract, that we would get a more favorable rate for the beginning portion of that 10-year renewal. Now, our next 2 years might go up a little bit more than it typically would have, but it won't go up as high as what these other competitive bids are, because we'll run that out for another couple of years, and we'll get savings.
I mean, you're into it, I know you study this a lot, or at least, you know, I know you're deep knowing the ins and outs. What, is Daytona saving anything doing it the way they're doing?
I don't know, because they pay their own landfill costs. Landfill costs, for the most part, are a pass-through. Whatever the landfill cost is, we get billed it, and that's what we pay it. There's really no markup on landfill costs. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Yeah. So because they pay the landfill cost, it just doesn't mean that it's reflected in what Waste Pro is charging the city. It's reflected in what the city is charging the customer. So these numbers that you see here, these are Waste Pro numbers to the
Yeah,
city,
okay.
not the city's numbers to the
All
customer.
right, yeah.
So in our case, we have a 30% markup across the board, and what we did last year, you guys weren't here, is we looked at what our markups were for our solid waste across all lines, whether it was a household collection or roll-off containers or 2-yard, 4-yard, 8-yard containers. We evaluated what the markup was on all that, and on average, it was about 30%. In some cases, it might have been as low as 14% for one, and maybe as high as 35, 40% on another. So what we did is we just threw a balance that would be the same markup across the board. And what are we at, 33% markup is what we have.
So we're not losing on anything right now then, right? I mean,
No, we don't typically lose money. Solid waste is one of our more healthier funds, and that's a fund that we dip into. It pays some of our road paving program, and more so, we use that as the front end for debris hauling and hurricane costs when we get a storm that comes through. So the solid waste fund fronts that money rather than the general fund, and then there's an accounting process where we have to pay that back, and that's over my head. That's a Michelle thing. But we do use the solid waste fund as that temporary cushion where some cities, some of them have to go out and get a loan to cover their hurricane costs initially. So we don't have to do that. We'll loan ourselves the money from the solid waste department.
nice.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of things. First of all, when I was campaigning and knocking on doors, everybody said, I'm mad about all things. I love our waste pickup. I mean, I didn't get one complaint. I got compliments everywhere. I thought that was great. When you said recycling, you said it's too expensive, we don't do it, but we have recycling pickup once a week.
We do recycling now,
Right.
and recycling has changed over the years. So, for example, glass is not a recyclable material anymore. Pizza boxes have never been recycled, but a lot of people get deliveries from Amazon like that, and there's a lot of cardboard boxes that make up a lot of recycling. So it's mostly plastics and cardboards and tin cans that make up our recycling right now.
Okay, so you're saying we wouldn't want to do more than that?
We can't do more than that.
Oh, okay.
Glass is not a recyclable.
Okay.
And that's a lot of the weight. So Bill had sent me an email, and really, the number, I think, I don't know if you remember what it was, 1.6 pounds per household is what the recycling is.
Right.
So the amount of recycling is actually very, very low.
Okay.
And it's because not every household recycles, but when you take the weight of our recycling and divide it by the number of households that we have, it averages a very small number.
Right.
But it costs the city money to recycle.
And we wouldn't want to eliminate that?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is one of the options, going back to Waste Pro, is let's talk about a pricing structure that includes recycling, and
Okay.
give me a pricing structure that excludes recycling.
Okay.
And if it excludes recycling, we would save money on the recycling side of the equation, but the regular solid waste would tick up a little bit, not nearly as much as what it would cost for the recycling. So there's some money to save. And the reason we haven't done it before is because, back then it was kind of a negligible amount of money, and there's a perception that recycling is good. Recycling is good. But a lot of people think that we recycle because it is financially beneficial, when really it's not, and a good portion, what do you say, 65% of the material that goes to recycling actually goes to the landfill because it doesn't qualify as recyclable material.
Okay.
So you're processing it once through a recycling process, and then you're redirecting it to the landfill for another process.
Okay.
I think it's a feel-good thing. We put the recycling in the bin thinking that we're doing good for the environment, when the reality is that if you put beer bottles and mayonnaise jars in there, they're not making it anyways. And most of that cardboard that isn't clean cardboard ends up going to landfill anyways. And I think it's almost 70% of what people put in that green bin never makes it to the recycling. It goes to the landfill. But we feel good about it. And I think there's an educational opportunity there for us as an elected body, but us as a community, that we need to push that forward.
right.
Because if we say we're going to eliminate recycling, we're the devil. Oh, you don't care about the environment? No, we care about the environment, but honestly, it's not going there anyways. And it costs 3 times as much to send it there than send it here than just put it in the green tote.
So here's an email that I had gotten from Bill last week, and he's basically saying, based on the national average per person, daily recycling is 1.6 pounds. Using the population of Holly Hill at 13,000 times the number based on 5.5 days per week times 52 weeks a year. At 12 months, 2,000 pounds, that would generate about 249.3 tons monthly. But over the last 12 months, we're averaging a generation of about 17.19 tons, or 334,000 pounds divided by our population, which is 2.6 pounds monthly per person, divided by 0.43 weeks, divided by 5.5 days, so 0.11 pounds. It's not much. It's math to the ridiculous, but it just goes to show how little recycling we're actually doing.
And last question, I'm sorry if I should know this, who's Bill Redmond?
Bill Redmond is a consultant that we use. He owns Redmond Consulting, and we hire him annually to manage our Waste Pro contract. He and his staff will go out and they'll inspect the trucks, they'll inspect the pickup that's taking place. He'll help us with negotiations, he'll mediate contract disputes that we may have. And the reason that you hear things like Waste Pro does a good job is in part because of Bill and his team that goes out and follows behind them. So if they're not doing their job, occasionally we'll get a phone call from a resident that says, hey, my street was missed. We put it in our tracking system, but we also call Bill, and Bill goes out there, and Bill has the ability to issue fines to the hauler. And those fines pay for Bill's salary and then some. So he does everything from checking the collections to making sure the equipment that's in the city is functioning properly. So he really is an asset to the city, his company, for what he offers to us.
Okay.
Penny, you had some questions?
Yeah, actually, I'm one of those complainants because they've missed my street a
Can I
few
look at you?
times, and that's why you looked my way. So he does take care of that. I really think, out of all fairness, that we should go after both, just to get an idea.
You're saying with and without recycling as opposed to going out for bid?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
In all fairness, that gives me the ability to compare.
And I think to, I want to say JD, to Commissioner excuse me, Delano's point, it might be helpful, when we're comparing the rates that the municipalities are paying, it'd be helpful to see what the residents are paying too. That would give us
Yeah.
more of an apples for apples. And I don't know if you can collect that as you're getting that.
We can probably figure it out, but I don't think most cities have a flat increase like we instituted last year.
No, like, so if the average bill in Holly Hill is $18, the average bill in Daytona is $22 for the consumer, not for the
Yeah,
municipality.
we can get an idea of what the residents are paying for their residential collection
Right,
only.
It might be helpful.
Yeah.
You guys have any questions?
But again, that's only reflective of the markup. So even if Waste Pro charged us all the same amount, but residents are paying differently, it's because those municipalities have a different markup.
Right, I get it, right.
Okay.
I'm just trying to see the cost to the consumer.
Right.
So what's so, I don't know how I could put this. What's the benefit of the recycling and what is the amount that's being recycled? Have anybody ever looked at that? Like you're figuring this out to where glass is no longer usable, some plastics are no longer usable, so the amount of what they're actually recycling, I mean, this isn't for us, I'm just curious
Yeah,
myself.
we get a report.
Is in any of the reports you got, has anybody figured out what the benefit of what they're actually getting out of recycling right now? I know when it
Well,
started
it's-
off, everybody thought everything that you
Yeah,
recycled was
it's
gonna be
different than it was
reused.
years ago when people used to recycle glass bottles, and
Yeah.
they sent the white glass over here and the green glass over there, and they incinerated it and melted it and made new glass. Well, they don't do that anymore. China was the biggest consumer of our recyclable materials. Well,
Yeah.
they don't take it anymore. So we do get a report from Bill, and I can certainly make that available.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
It's okay.
I'm just curious because, I mean, I know that if we ever started to advertise, we're not gonna recycle anymore. I mean, you're gonna get hit with phone calls, probably the place packed and everything else,
I think
for
what
the
Bill said
environment.
was, a couple of years ago, Deltona was one of the most recent ones that did away with their recycling, and they had phone calls for about a month or so, and then it
Yeah.
kind of died down. And we would probably experience the same thing here. We would
Yeah.
probably get a series of complaints about people who are environmentally friendly and want to recycle regardless of the cost, and you're going to get some people that it just doesn't matter to.
That's why I'm just trying to hit the question of, is it worth it? Is it, I mean, well, what are we saving by, if we eliminated recycling?
Right.
I mean, would the citizens have a cheaper trash bill?
Well, they're never going to have a cheaper trash bill because it's going to go up. The question is, will it go up as much because we eliminate?
Yeah, of
the
course,
recycling?
nothing's ever gonna go
And
down.
then there's services for commercial recycling, and I would assume that if a resident wanted to do recycling, they could probably pay for that same service themselves.
I would bet they wouldn't do it.
I bet they wouldn't do it, that's what I'm saying. But why should all the citizens pay for
Right.
whatever? Got anything, Roy?
The only thing I'd say about it is when you recycle things, sometimes you gotta use a little common sense of what it is. I mean, you don't wanna throw iron, copper, aluminum, things like that in the trash where you could pile them up and sell them or take them to somebody that can sell them and make something out of them. And another thing is too, you're not gonna get away from rate increases because I know for an absolute fact, the price of vehicles have gone sky high, the price of fuel has gone up to operate them, the price of the people that actually work on them have probably close to doubled and everything, so it's going to be a hard negotiation thing. We have to kind of look at their side of it as well. They have a lot more expense to do it and all on that part of it, but as far as this recycling is going, most of recycling, when I do it, I use a kind of common sense on it. Where I work at, we have a recycling bins for everything. You throw the iron one thing, aluminum one thing, copper another thing, and whatever goes in it, and they recycle it themselves, you know what I mean? So that's the way I would look at it. I wouldn't want to throw a bunch of iron in the trash pile, so.
Sounds like we're all in agreement with you, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll work with Tim Dolan and with Bill on that in this coming week. Then the other item that we had to talk a little bit about, Brian will come up, is the rezoning of parcel 4 on what we'll call the Fountainhead PUD.
Commissioners here. You are all probably familiar with the Live Local Act. And the Live Local Act basically says that if you have a piece of property and it has either a mixed use that allows commercial, or you have a commercial piece of property, or it's an industrial piece of property, that you can put affordable housing on that property without really any approval from the city. It does not need to be zoned for that, and they're able to put it on that particular property at densities that may exceed what is going on around it. So we have a piece of property, the Fountainhead Parcel 4. It is a property that has had interest expressed in it with regard to being used as a property for affordable housing and being used under the Live Local Act. So the question is that something that we want to happen? Of course, if that were to happen under the Live Local Act, it would also remove the property from the tax roll. So some of the options that we have while we own the land, if we decide that that's not something that we want to do, what you have the option of doing is rezoning that property. And you can rezone that property to a straight zoning district. By straight zoning district, I mean it would be a district that would allow just single-family homes, or a district that you could perhaps rezone it to a planned development and allow only single-family uses, but you take away the current component of being a mixed-use type property. So you wouldn't be able to do commercial, wouldn't be able to do any type of industrial. It would be just a straight zone, single-family residential. We would probably, just to be safe, Live Local does say zoning. However, to be safe, I would recommend that we also change the land use to one that only allows single-family homes as well. Perhaps a high-density residential type of future land use. Because the land use that we have there now is called a mixed-use 3, and that land use allows a mixture of things like commercial and industrial as well. So that's really the situation that you have before you, something to think about with regard to whether or not we want to rezone it.
Commissioner Curry.
I had a couple questions. First, Brian, why are we having to do that if we opted out? And that might be a question for you, Joe,
Opted out of what?
of the Live Local Act.
Well, we opted out of Live Local in that one section of that median, whatever that median income was. But
Okay.
there are other levels that
Okay,
local would
okay,
still
okay.
apply.
And secondly, is this something that we can do since it's still under contract for what, another year and a half?
Well, it's in the PD as part of a zoning allowed in the PD, but the developer has lost his purchase options on it.
Okay.
So.
So then that's what gives us the ability, although it's still under that umbrella of the agreement.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had, Mayor.
Is it gonna make Fountainhead deter Fountainhead from any further projects in there by rezoning it? I mean, they'll be able to still use it, or they'll only be able to use it for residential at that point?
They would be able to use it only for residential.
At that point?
If it was decided that the land was sold to them.
Yeah.
It would only be for residential uses.
Yeah, because they don't own it yet. They,
And that's always been the intention, is that parcel 4 would be used for some type of workforce housing. So.
If they came to us and wanted to buy it, I mean, they wanted to buy it now, I guess they're just not ready to buy it, but if they came back and wanted to buy it, are we able to rezone it? If they wanted to ask us and set us out a plan and said, hey, I want to do this with it, but it's zoned residential, would we be able to have it come before the commission again and rezone it to benefit their plans?
They always have a right to ask.
Just curious.
How many acres is that, Rob?
I believe it's about 5 acres.
5 acres. It's my opinion that the highest and best use for that parcel is multifamily. Part of the PUD, the entire Fountainhead project, has been some type of workforce housing. And so I'm not so certain, are we doing a preemptive strike to prevent something that might bring us what we want to begin with? Live Local, my only fear is how much density can they exceed our current zoning? Because if Live Local is to create affordable housing on a property that we are trying to encourage affordable housing on, and we change the land use, we change the zoning, and 2 years from now, someone comes to us and says, hey, I would like to put workforce housing there. Oh, great. Well, we're going to have to do the rezoning, and we're going to have to do a comp plan amendment, and it's going to take us 6 months to do that, and then this developer goes somewhere else.
Well, just a point of clarification, Mayor. I'm not sure that it's to prevent affordable housing or workforce housing, because really, you can have a parcel, and as long as it allows multifamily, someone can come and put that on there and make it affordable housing. I think the issue with removing it from the opportunity of Live Local is to prevent them from being able to do it and not pay taxes.
Okay.
Now,
Mayor, my concern would be the tax exempt status, and also, we would have no control over the density, correct?
That is true.
And I don't like either one of those options.
These places tend to not pay taxes anyway. Charleston Place does not pay taxes.
Well, we found that out when we looked into all that.
Holly Point Apartments does not pay taxes. So whether or not they'll pay taxes will be determined based on the type of development it is. But what Live Local will also do, it will allow them to increase the density beyond what our rules set.
That's my only heartburn. I'd like to know what that, if it's a 10% increase, and you're talking, 50 apartments, now you got 55 apartments, that's not a big deal. But if you're talking they can double the allowable density, that's a concern. I don't see any developer ever going in there and putting single-family houses in that area. The only thing that's going to go there is apartments. It's either going to be apartments or it's going to be vacant land. And if it's a vacant land, there's no taxable value anyway. So that's my concern, is that I don't want us to go down this road preventing something that's what we want anyways, if that makes any sense.
I mean, it will still be zoned multifamily for the purpose of work.
But I thought I heard Brian say we were going to zone it to single-family.
No.
That's what I heard.
It would be it's called a single-family zoning district, but for example, in R6, R7, they allow single-family, two-family, and multifamily.
Okay, so
okay.
that clarifies. I heard you say single-family, and that's all I zeroed in on.
Right.
My big thing, Mayor, would be the density issue.
Right, so.
Well, under Live Local, the density would be the highest density allowed on any land in the city or county where residential development is allowed.
That's going to be the density of Marina Grande.
Well, it's within a certain distance, though, isn't it?
Well, the distances actually are applied to height,
Oh, just height, not density.
based on my understanding of
Okay.
it, yes.
So
Yeah, and then
basically, every project I've seen that's ever been proposed there is no more than 5 stories tall. But what I just hear you read is that we could have a 25-story tower there.
Well, no, there is an exception. It says if a proposal is on 2 or more sides adjacent to single-family zone property within a single-family zone development with at least 25 contiguous single-family homes, a municipality may limit the highest of the following. And then it tells and one of the choices that you have is 3 stories.
I don't think that would apply there, though. But okay, so you've cured my heartburn, so I'm, for one, I'm okay with moving forward with it.
So am I.
Any other questions for Brian?
No, I guess not.
So there'll be more to discuss. They'll come back and formal action at a commission meeting. This will take, it has to go to planning and appeals, getting a comp plan amendment, a zoning amendment. This is going to take months to get, before it even comes back to this body. So.
Thanks.
Thank you,
I don't think we
Brian.
hear any objections, Brian. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, now we'll jump into the
Thank you for sitting through
vulnerability.
this, audience. I know you didn't care anything about that other stuff.
Thanks for being here.
Okay, tell me a little bit more about I'm sorry, I don't really want to stretch anything out. The Live Local, how does that work? I mean,
Tallahassee.
it sounds like you have to live here. You don't have to get up. I mean, we're just like we're sitting in the,
Tallahassee basically usurped our authority because they know better than we do. And they said, you want low-income housing, affordable housing? Here's how we're going to make it happen, and we're going to stick it in your city wherever we can, and you can't do anything about it.
Pretty much.
so anybody just qualifies for it. I mean, if you're a builder, of course, you'd have to have a
Well,
license.
it's got to be on a certain size parcel of land, so there are some restrictions and limitations to it.
There is, okay.
It's got to be in land that can be used for commercial or industrial. It can't be put on a residential property, which is why we want to rezone this to residential so that it comes off the Live Local.
Oh, I see.
There were some other communities that had projects in the pre-planning phases that once this Live Local Act came about, the people that build these projects swept in and built a less desirable low-income housing than the more desirable project that was going to go there, and they couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, what you said a minute ago got me to understand what it was, because I read it, I couldn't, it just went over me. I was like, oh, I lost it. But, yeah, okay, I understand now, but that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, just think of it as,
Your first
somebody
analysis.
builds a pretty dense residential complex, and they're expected to pay a couple $100,000 a year in taxes. Well, if they don't have to pay those taxes, now they get to take that money and they roll it forward on another project.
Yeah, sure.
So it's a huge benefit to the developer to use Live Local. And I get what the state's trying to do is to infill some of these commercial and industrial parcels of land, just to try to get the workforce housing in there. And it's called Live Local because it's supposed to be enticing to your public servants, your police, fire, teachers. It's supposed to be able to create housing for them to live in the communities where they work.
Is that what's happening out here on LPGA? Is a lot of that?
I don't know, I think that's fair market housing.
Market house. Market rate house.
Yeah, I don't think it's Live Local.
No, it's not any of those, all those apartments out there? Just curious. We're just sitting in a meeting, so I thought I'd ask.
All right, we'll jump into the vulnerability assessment, and this is going to be Antoine and Joe, and David King from Mead Hunt is here to explain or give us a review of the analysis.
You can see.
You have control there?
Yep.
Good evening. David King with Mead Hunt. Thanks for the opportunity for us to present to the commission and this workshop for what we have been able to do to date with our vulnerability assessment. A little bit about the vulnerability assessment and what the goals were. So the city acquired a $75,000 grant, and it was from the Resilient Florida program. And DEP is the administrator of that program. What DEP is trying to do, this was an effort that the governor, initiative the governor started, really wanted to get an idea from across the state of how vulnerable our public assets are. It's the assets that are owned by the cities and counties and the state. So this program was really started out as a data collection program, and that's really a lot of the effort of this vulnerability assessment is really to figure out what is vulnerable in the state, and then eventually the state's going to roll this up in a big database and have a really good idea of what, if the state gets hit by certain storms like it has in the past, what could that do, and what could be the lingering effects on that. The focus of the vulnerability assessment and the DEP's program is really to look at public assets. It's understand that when we have flooding, it affects public and private assets. Homes and businesses get flooded, but really the main focus is for the public assets and really that critical infrastructure. Of course, a lot of the information that we come up with of the scenarios, of the flooding scenarios, could be looked at and attributed to what could happen to the private properties in those same adjacent areas. But again, that's kind of the basis. It's really about flooding. It's not about wind or anything else. It's all about flooding. And they want to know, from a flooding situation of in today's storms, what's a critical storm, or what the city or county see, and then what could sea level do to compound that issue. So again, all that gets rolled up into the work that we're doing, the work that all these other cities and counties doing throughout the state gets rolled up into a statewide database. Next slide, please. So there's two main parts to the vulnerability assessment. One's the exposure, and that's when we look at the mapping, look at the flooding, look at where the existing facilities are, and then also incorporate those sea level rises in different flooding scenarios. And then the second part is sensitivity analysis, and with that, what we look at is, okay, it's going to flood here, but how about that asset? How about that public facility, whether it be a building or utility asset or a roadway or other public asset? What does that flooding do to it? Will it damage it? How sensitive is it to flooding, if you will? So we acquire those. The basic steps is acquiring the critical assets and the climate hazard. That's, again, when we're going to pick a storm, when we have picked a storm. We create that geodatabase. A lot of that information is coming from all different sources that the state already has, from the city's own GIS, And we refine that data to get it in the format that the state is looking for, because again, they want all the data from all the cities and counties to look very similarly, so when they roll up in the database, it all talks with each other, if you will. Stay on the slide for just a second, please. Thank you. We conduct the exposure sensitivity analysis, and obviously we've got to produce a bunch of maps and data tables for the state's use, and that's going to be very helpful for y'all, and then eventually deliver a final report to the city and also to DEP, with that geodatabase. Talk about sea level for a second. So they want to not only for this study and this analysis to compare what could happen today under a storm event, but what could happen in the future. So they have defined across the state sea level rise situations for everybody to consider. And they require us to look at 2 years, 2040 and 2070, and then 2 scenarios in that. So there's a bunch of estimates that NOAA's come up with. That's a low estimate, a low estimate, a high estimate. So they actually take 2 of the curves in there, the intermediate low and intermediate high. So something, if their estimates are on the low side, what would happen, and then what would happen on the high side. And for Daytona, this you can see obviously as years go by, if NOAA's predictions are correct, this is what could happen in sea level rise, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. But and for our evaluation purposes, when we talk about sea level rise, Halifax River is directly connected to the ocean, so we carry that straight across. It's a very linear approach and comparison, if you will. So if the sea level comes up an inch, we're going to assume that the Halifax River comes up an inch.
And that data, David, it says 2017, that's what that is?
Yeah, so years ago, they from time to time they have updated it, but for currently what DEP is asking us to evaluate, I think it's 2017 is the latest estimates that NOAA's put out there.
Okay.
So in looking at sea level rise, and then in your situation, and a lot of other city situation that's adjacent to an intercoastal waterway or the ocean, it really, you become a coastal high hazard area, and that's the terminology that DEP utilizes. And inland, they have other terminology for that type of flooding area. But so what these 2 graphics show, on the left is 2040. I apologize, we don't have a big 2040, but the year 2040 on the left, 2070 on the right. Just with sea level rise, it's only, and the lighter colors versus the dark red colors are the 2, the intermediate low and intermediate high levels. Just without it raining, with just sea level rise, we could see inundation levels for areas such as that. So wherever it's colored is where water would be above the ground surface, if you will. And I realize some of the inland colored areas are waterways, if you will, the canals and the ponds and stuff like that. So, but for obviously against the river there, anything that's under that red color would be inundated. When I say inundated, I mean there's water above the ground level. It could be an inch, it could be more, but it's above the ground level. So, and that's again with no storm event. That's just sea level rise. So in our exposure analysis, we had to define a baseline storm event. So what city had previously, and our firm actually previously completed a stormwater master plan for the city, and in that we looked at various storm events. But in that study, the primary storm event that was looked at was a 13-inch in 24-hour rain event. That's the 1% probability event, and that is, and this will be the last time I'll use the term, that's a 100-year event. Everybody doesn't like using those year event numbers because those things happen. They expect them only happen, at that frequency when they could happen at any time, if you will. So, but we'll keep talking about that 13-inch, 24-hour event is really what our baseline flood was. So the graphic to the right shows, under that scenario, in that analysis that we did in the stormwater modeling years ago, what areas of the city that could have standing water inundated, if you will, in that event. And then from there, we had to stack water, we had to look at what could happen in 2020 and 2070 under that same storm event. And with that, you can see that, we're going to add those numbers that are shown in the table to that hydraulic conditions, if you will. And we assumed that those higher elevations in Halifax, they're with a storm event, and the way the hydraulics works, if we have a higher tailwater, higher water elevation in that river, your stormwater system is not going to perform as well. So you're going to have this undue hydraulic effect upstream. So these two maps show what could be potentially inundated during the same as stormwater event with those future sea level rise conditions. In 2020 on the left, 2070 on the right. Again, the bolder colors in both maps are the intermediate low and intermediate high. You can kind of see the added area. So everything, if their estimate for the intermediate high, let's say on the left side in the 2040 is correct, everything in that light green and the darker blue would be potentially inundated. If it's their intermediate low, it's only the dark blue areas and not the light green areas. So
When we say inundated, what's the level of water?
it's different throughout the city, so that's why it's hard to, because it's based on the topography of the city, it varies, of course. So this is above ground level, and it could be an inch or more. And anything that was measurable, we had a high stage elevation of the water above the existing ground elevation, that gave it a definition of inundation or flooding. And then when we get into the sensitivity analysis, which I'll explain, that's when we looked at where the particular asset was, where that lift station was, where that police station was, how hot the water gets there compared to that actual, and that was the second step of this process. One thing to note here is redoing the whole hydraulic model was not in scope. I know the city's looking to update the stormwater master plan and update the stormwater model in the future. I think they requested funding from the county for such. So we took a kind of a straight line, simplistic approach of applying that sea level rise throughout the city. So if there was a whatever inch rainfall event, there's going to be a rise in the Halifax, we took that same number of inches and stacked on top of our hydraulic results for a storm event. So let's say further up in the system, if the 13-inch rainfall brought the water to here, and the sea level rise was another however many inches, we just added that for the analysis. So it's not 100% hydraulically accurate to do that because you will get some differing answers. But for this exercise and for what the state's looking for, it was a very viable approach. Next slide. So again, sensitivity analysis, and Mayor, to your point, what we then looked at is we looked at the individual assets, and we looked in those particular areas, what assets publicly owned, and we were required to look at not only city-owned, but also state-owned. Any government entity that owns a public facility had to be a part of the data set, if you will. And I'll talk about some of the groupings that we had here, but we estimated those elevations, and then we, and not only were they exposed, but in the color scale from the green, yellow, orange to red, how sensitive were they? So, and depending on what the different asset was, we had to have a kind of a grading scale, a different grading scale for the different assets. So let's say a roadway, or many roadways can get flooded, have standing water on it, even traffic during those flooded conditions and still survive and not have permanent damage. You get rising water come up into, let's say, a lift station, electrical, mechanical equipment, that's real damage, real cost, and that's real loss of service during that time frame as well. So we had to kind of come up with a scaling factor on that. DEP doesn't give us specific guidelines on that, so I can see when DEP gets all this data, they're going to get some differing levels of sensitivity, but that's DEP as we're doing this, they're kind of let's say they're making it as they're going, but they're refining the process we go, and we're having to live by some of the refinements as, refining as we're delivering these projects to them, so. But on the left side is more transportation aspect, assets, bus stops, boat ramps, bridges, think of all of those things, but those are all categorized in the transportation. Things on the right are more of your critical assets and utility assets, wastewater, sanitary sewer, solid waste, electric, all those things that are, kind of critical utility infrastructure, if you will. Next slide. So to dive in a little bit more on the transportation impact, so for DEP is really more concerned with major thoroughfares, evacuation routes and stuff like that. So from a coloring scheme for this exhibit here, we've pointed to most of those things. So those roadways you can see in color, obviously LPGA and US 1. Most of the local roadways or your roadways, you do have a few county roadways as well, but most of those are impacted in some level, shape, or form, obviously, because much of those are in those inundated areas. But again, a lot of the roadways aren't, and we do have a complete listing of that in our data set. But again, a lot of those roadways can be inundated and without permanent damage. But when we're looking at the variables of how much impact a transportation facility, a roadway could handle, we look at how deep the water is over the roadway. We looked at what type of traffic is going to be on that roadway. A local roadway that's going to get a few vehicles during that flooding event won't have the damage like a major thoroughfare that's going to get a lot of heavy traffic during the flooding. And then a lot of times the construction material type, if it's a heavy-duty roadway that's built as such, it can survive many more flooding situations or in traffic during those time frames. So, next slide. And then to dive a little bit more into the vertical infrastructure, obviously DEP is very interested in this as well. It's noted in the second bullet, many of the city's water and wastewater facilities are impacted in the base flood, and then even further in the 2040 and 2070 sea level rises. I will note that even though we mentioned the various wastewater treatment plant components, and really should say water treatment as well, because it's one, you have one complex there. Many of those potential impacts are being improved with the current projects too. So we had to look at existing conditions, not proposed conditions. So we're looking at the things that were out there at the start of our effort and everything. So that's obviously a changing condition as we speak, if you will, but we have to give the data on the current situation again, so.
David, can you just remind me again, what is the base flood? Because I'm looking at a map of a lot of purple, and that's the base flood.
Yes, so the base flood, again, is from the previous stormwater master plan hydraulic model. 24-hour rainfall event would do within the city. Okay. And how the city's stormwater system could handle that, and what levels of water levels would be created by that particular storm event. So when we stacked on top of that, the sea level rise to come up with the final answer on what could be impacted today versus 2040 versus 2070.
So to understand that, based on this map, a 13-inch storm in a 24-hour period by 2070 is going to create flooding throughout most of the city.
You're going to have potential of standing water throughout most of the city, yes.
Okay. I won't be here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You use the word hydraulically a lot. I just don't understand what that means.
No problem.
Okay.
So the way the cities and anybody's stormwater system work is really, it's hydraulics and hydrology. So hydrology is really the water coming, the rain, if you will, and what that rain looks like. I spoke to a 13-inch, 24-hour event, and that means, over 24 hours, there's a distribution of how that rainfall's happening, and there's different models out there of what that distribution looks like. But every storm event's a little different. When we do this modeling, there's many different styles, if you will, storm events. But all that's the hydrology. And now once the water gets into your system, and your water's trying to get it through the pipes, through the canals, through the ditches, into the inlets, that's when hydraulics come into play. So it's really, all the physics come into play of how that water can move through your system.
Got it.
Or how it can't sometimes because of limitations, because of too small pipes, or blockages, or roughness in a pipe, or a ditch that's maybe not it's got a lot of growth in it or something like that. All that comes into play. So to eventually, and that hydrology and hydraulics modeling will result in a staging of water through your system in a storm event. And it's a dynamic model that, rain starts, everything's looking good, and the water starts backing up. It's exactly what we see in real life. And eventually that water, goes out, and the hydraulics of your system is working, and hopefully working well to move that water through that system and
Thank you.
evacuate all that water.
Thank you.
So the last grouping of critical infrastructure assets that had to be looked at, it was other, city buildings, city service buildings and stuff like that. So fire stations, community centers, we look at schools, we look at everything else. So a few to note, of course, is your previous fire station. Your new fire station is much higher. Your old fire station is now a storage facility. The previous fire station was in harm's way, if you will, even though you've been lucky. Your police station, not so lucky. Obviously, the bottom of this building is a much lower, elevation. And of course, all of this gets worsened with sea level rise. So if any of your facilities have had been impacted by past flood events, that same flood event in 2040, 2070, if the sea level rise predictions come true, without other improvements happening in the city, could make that flooding worse, of course. So what I just explained is really the basis of the vulnerability assessment, the exposure and sensitivity analysis. And again, all this data sets, there's, in the end, when you see the final report, it will be a somewhat short report, but there's a whole bunch of GIS data sets to go along with this. And it's really more of a GIS, it is definitely more of a GIS data collection exercise than an engineering exercise, because we're really stating the facts of what could happen and where things sit today. But the area adaptation plan, it's separate from the vulnerability assessment, but it's part of the overall, it's kind of vulnerability and resilience planning. It's really kind of the next step. It's like, okay, now we know that what could happen, what are we going to do about it, type of thing. So the graphic on the left shows you kind of DEP's standard approach of how they want cities and counties to go through this. DEP isn't fully pushing area adaptation plans as of yet. A number of cities and counties around the state have started going there. But what we've seen and what we've included and what's in the scope of our scope with the city is to do a bit of that, if you will. So we really want to help the city prioritize some of the most potentially impacted assets and give some ideas of what mitigation strategies could be applied to reduce the potential impacts to that. So with that, there's really four basic strategies, if you will. So protection, it's basically leaving that asset in place, protecting it, with the flooding event. Accommodation, it's very similar, but you basically modify the structure, if you will, to accommodate the flooding. The flooding's still going to happen, so let's make it flood-proof, if you will. That's the accommodation. The avoidance is, it's a little tough, especially for Holly Hill. You don't get the luxury of maybe, because a lot of cities and counties that are growing, they're doing this for proposed infrastructure. So they're saying, hey, a new lift station's going in, let's not put it in the low area, let's put it up on the higher area. So that's avoidance. All of your facilities are pre-existing, and you don't have a lot of growth and redevelopment happening all at once, so you don't have a lot of opportunities in the avoidance. And then the managed relocation or the retreat is an interesting approach because it's basically, the managed relocation is basically taking that asset and moving it out of that harm's way. The retreat is where you, I guess the extreme option or alternative of retreat is where you basically abandon that public infrastructure. So we know of some cities that have low-lying roadways, and they say, hey, we just won't own that roadway anymore. We'll turn the roadway over to the property owners, and we'll retreat. The city will actually retreat. So not proposing anything like that for the city of Holly Hill, but those are the 4 basic strategies that you have really to look at. And we'll look at your potential impacted facilities and propose a number of things that I would say they're more some categorical mitigation recommendations, like for lift stations, let's say, obviously can't start relocating lift stations very easily, but we can do some things to protect and accommodate those lift stations, so raising the electrical facilities up, making the facilities what can be inundated and still operate, improving them so they can do that. We will address some funding opportunities if there are anything out there. There are implementation grants under this Resilient Florida program, which you've got $75,000 to do this effort with. It is a yearly cycle. It's interesting. Last year's cycle, they not only graded, or they haven't finally ranked them, but they have a draft ranking of the submissions from last year. But what they did is the draft ranking takes them out for 3 years of funding. So don't know exactly how the legislature is going to handle that, but there's a potential that you may not have available funding under this program for another 3 years if this program doesn't sunset between now and then. So a lot of questions there, but there's some other opportunities out there that we'll do. And then, like I mentioned before, we will look at some priorities too. I'm sure y'all, the city staff will have some ideas of what they want to tackle first, and we'll help with those decisions. And if there's any partnership opportunities, and a lot of times in your utilities, may or may not be. Sometimes with the FPL, there might be some opportunities to do some things jointly that help each other out. And obviously, sometimes in the roadway side of things, there might be opportunities for DOT and the county to do some things together with the city to help all parties out with this. So that's basically it. We are through the vulnerability assessment, submitting things through Superintendent, having them review things, hopefully approve things. Steve's trying to get reimbursed and trying to get everything matched up exactly how they like it. We'll close the book on the vulnerability assessment, finalize that report, and do this area adaptation plan and mitigation strategy as a separate technical memo. And that's yet to come.
Anyone have any questions at this time?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm interested in figuring out how we apply what's in progress right now that could be affected one way or another that we could fix right now. Is that a good way to?
Commissioner Snow, I think that's our next discussion. Where do we go next after this?
Okay, because I'm trying to apply, I'm thinking you didn't use what we're doing now in your study. I believe you said that.
There's improvements to the water and wastewater treatment plants that's either underway or about to be underway.
Right.
That's going to address some of the concerns that some of those facilities and those.
Okay, so we'll start to understand that next. Okay, thank you.
So David, when will the full assessment be available? I've got a lot of folks that are asking to see copies of the final assessment.
I would say for us to be complete, we're going to have DEP approve the final product, and we're probably a step and a half away from that. So I would say 30, 45 days if DEP
Approves it
moves
as
things
is.
along.
Okay.
Sometimes we've had a lot of turnover too. This is a new program. I don't think here we've had as many problems. We're doing another one of these, and we're on our 5th project manager with DEP, and each time the rules kind of change. So,
Sounds like the only thing worse is dealing with FEMA.
probably many times, it's just a higher level.
Anyone else have any questions?
I just think one of the biggest accomplishments that we're doing is by using those bypass pumps on those lift stations, not depending just on having furnished an outside electrical source for them when electricity goes out, but to be able to bypass those lift stations and not have a lift station back up or something. I think we're in the process of doing a lot of that now, right?
Right.
And that's helping. I think that's one of the biggest steps we could take right now to keep the wastewater out of people's houses and away from people's property and things.
Yeah, this, when we look at the impacts, if you will, we're just talking about how does that lift station get impacted? If it gets flooded and it's not operating anymore, that's.
But then the bypass
But
pump,
the secondary impacts, like you said, that now we don't have flowing wastewater, what happens then?
yeah, the big Thompson pumps now will just bypass the lift station and
Right.
say
And
it's,
that's basically accommodation in the way of, hey, we're gonna modify that lift station, add that bypass pump to allow it to operate under those conditions when the flooding has caused the outage of the electricity, if you will.
so if a lift station goes crap on the water, you got a pump to just completely eliminate the lift station.
Correct.
I like that.
Joe, is this study taking into account the duct bills that are being installed, or does
No,
it not?
what this study is doing primarily is looking at sea level rise and base flood elevations during a storm of 13 inches
Right.
or greater. So the duct bills, those are going to help on our, and again, this analysis, David said, doesn't take storms into account.
Right.
But the
But
duct
those
bills.
assist with the water flowing out.
Yeah, the duct bills and the pipelining are going to help the overall stormwater management system. And like I've told people, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help their individual home, but it may. And we won't know that. Anything that we do, any project that we do, we will not know if it's a success until a storm comes. And whether or not it's a success is going to depend if their home's flood again. But, the scary thing for me, these are the kind of pictures that keep kids up late at night. That's not me. When you see a base flood elevation where the majority of the city is going to have some level of standing water, and I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but I look at that and go,
I'm thinking 2070, we're in trouble.
what you think we're going to do about that?
You can't stop the sea level rise.
You can't.
That's right.
So we could do everything perfect, and the sea level rise is still going to flood our city.
Right, so you can pump all the water you want into the intercoastal. If the intercoastal is coming into your city, you can't stop that. So there are certainly some enormous challenges ahead for us to handle what we'll call the 25-year, the 50-year storms, the occasional.
We're not calling them those anymore.
Yeah, we
I know.
can't call them those anymore.
For the lack of, like the county manager said, when it comes to a 10-inch in 24-hour rain period, we do pretty well. And we should be proud of the fact that we do pretty well. Some other areas, they can't sustain a 4 to 6-inch rain.
Until the Halifax River raises another 6 inches, then you're in trouble.
But when the sea level rise, the river rises, and then you have these very unusual 15, 18, 20-inch in a 24-hour storm periods, it really limits the ability of what anyone can do.
Looks like Roy's house is okay.
Roy's on a ridge.
I know,
We had
Roy's on Ridge.
unlimited funds, we could do a lot more.
Question, the check valves were not in place in the original hydraulic model, so.
Okay.
So those starting conditions for that.
And I know I call them duct bills still, and they're not called that anymore, but that's what's in my brain.
I know exactly what you mean, but you're right, there are some benefits that those will provide.
Okay.
For certain events that aren't reflecting this because they weren't existing at the time of.
Okay.
When we established what that base flood was.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Duck bills are a big improvement. I think the duck bills are a big help. But then you need some way to get the water out there so it can't come back into duck bills, you know what I mean? And that requires a lot of money for expensive pumps, correct?
Yeah, when you think of what, as the water keeps rising, what can happen is the duckbills, the backflow preventers, won't let any water come in, but until that water.
But you gotta get it out there.
Yeah, the water won't grab the gravity out either. So
That's why you need
the water keeps
expensive.
building, the rain keeps happening on the upstream side of the duckbill, you're gonna have to physically move that water.
So if we had unlimited funds, we could buy enough expensive pumps from Thompson Pumps or somebody to pump it out there, and the duck bills keep it out there until the tide goes down, right?
Are you working for Thompson Pumps now? You trying to sell
No, but I've dealt with them a lot, I'll tell you, and I know they're very expensive.
And the other thing to go along with that too is, and you think of places like, New Orleans and stuff like that, you need a levee system because that duckbill works until the water rises above the land and crests over the land, and that duckbill's not doing anything at that point. So, and in these future scenarios, that's what we see. We see water coming across the land, not just
Right.
backing up through your stormwater system.
And remember, that happens several times when you see the intercoastal come over onto Riverside Drive. The duckbills at that point are of no use.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to see if we could have Mr. Forte explain some of his communications from the meetings with the county.
I think that's next.
Oh, okay,
Where do we go from here? I think we're going to talk about where do we go from here now.
okay.
So where do we go from here? The mayor and I and Joseph and Steve met out at the county with the county manager, their engineer, a couple of folks out there, and we talked. We needed to have the conversation because one of the things people are going to ask me is, have you ever talked to the county? Well, we did talk to the county. And we expressed our concerns in a couple of areas, that being the maintenance of the county canal system. Now, keeping in mind the cities, swales, and roadside canals are still in need of maintenance, so that is a concern. But we had a greater concern initially with how the county lowers the Rio Way Pond, which is just north of the dog park, how that gets lowered and then comes through the canal system. I call it the Northwest Canal, but I think it's called the B29. It's the B29 that the county calls it. And that canal is actually pretty open. The mayor and I drove that in a golf cart the whole distance, and it goes down to the LPGA canal, and it's pretty wide open. And when they open that gate to allow the water to drain out, it goes into that canal, it comes through and past the dog park canal, and it goes around the Mirage Pond. It's called the Mirage Pond, it's called Lake Vincent, it's called something, it's got a couple of different names. But they did convince me that lowering the Rio Way Pond does not fill the Mirage Pond. It goes around it. So we had a pretty good conversation about, well, what can we do with the Mirage Pond? Because when we set pumps up over there, the hoses don't even reach the water, and if it does reach the water, we're only dropping it a couple of inches, which is really not impactful to the capacity that's in there. So one of the things that I would like us to do when we start to talk about the next steps, and that next step is the $194,000 grant that we have from the county for the next stormwater study, which I think should be, have some more specific projects in it. And I think that should be one of the projects that we evaluate, is whether we could put a structure in at the Mirage Pond where we can open the gate, and these gates open from the bottom up, to allow water to drain into that B29 Northwest Canal and get into the LPGA Canal and out several days before a storm comes. Not a day or two or three. By then, it's really too late because all we're doing is filling the canal system. We'd have to empty it a week in advance. As soon as we know there's a storm that's potentially coming to this area, we would have to lower that lake and let it move out with the incoming and outgoing tides. Those canals are tidal driven. So that's a possibility. Now, can we lower it a couple of feet? I don't know. That's what the study's going to have to determine. But that seemed like a reasonable option at the time to see if that will help lower that lake to create the volume necessary, the capacity necessary to take on more water to help prevent the flooding on those cul-de-sacs that lead up to Anniston. We talked about cleaning the LPGA canal and creating, it's not so much the depth that's as important as it is the width of the canal, because the water table is the water table, and no matter how deep you go, it's still the same water table. It's really the width of the canal that would create a little bit more capacity and more ability to flow. Joseph brought up several times determining the elevation of the water when the storms come in, because we get a lot of backup west of the railroad tracks, and we need to see why that's backing up and how we can address that. The maintenance and cleaning of the Northeast Canal from LPGA all the way up to the Cala Grande Arches and beyond. When we drove that area, there were a lot of choke points, meaning there was static water that really wasn't flowing. There were trees down blocking the flow. And, you think of it as a cardiac artery that's, 80% blocked or more. And, yeah, water is moving in and out of there, but at a very slow rate. So they are concerned with that. I know Councilman Troy Kent had mentioned county cleaning their ditches in their meeting recently, which is encouraging to hear that it's a priority for him. So we have those discussions that are underway. We also have, as you know, the Duckbill project, which is underway. We have $4.5 million of pipelining, of stormwater pipelining, which again, it's a lot of our stormwater pipes are in the water table, and if there are openings in there where the groundwater is going to infiltrate into our stormwater system, that's taking up capacity. So perhaps by lining $4.5 million worth of pipe, that'll at least open up capacity for the stormwater to sit there as it works its way out to the intercoastal. So those are some of the projects that we have going on, some of the thought process that we have going on. You'll hear next Tuesday night that we're reorganizing the Public Works Department. Antoine will be retiring in half a dozen months or less, and Joseph is going to step up as the director. Steve is going to step up as the deputy director. When Antoine retires, it's my mission to try to hire a stormwater manager that will come in and help address strictly stormwater needs of the city. It's a big ask, but we'll see if that's something that we can do between now and June. So that's kind of what we have going on right now. And in addition to what we're doing with the water and wastewater plants and the lift stations, there's a lot of projects going on. But I've said it many times, these projects are going to help the overall system. It may not help anyone's individual home.
Joe, the bypass of the pumps or lift stations, that is going to specifically help with the sewage.
Right.
And we're continuing to try to put in as many bypasses as we can, but they're
Right.
very expensive.
Yeah, they're being designed into the rehabs of the lift stations that we're doing. We learned that the lift station over by Metro Electronics had a lot of problems, and I think that's now been resolved, so hopefully we won't have a repeat of what happened down on Graham Avenue. We're thinking that might have been a huge contributor to what was happening over there.
So as we're rehabbing these lift stations, we're,
We're looking at pumps more so than generators.
okay.
Yeah, when the generators go underwater, they don't work.
Yeah.
Anybody on this side have any questions for Joe?
So, do we need to talk any more about scope of service for the next stormwater analysis? Yeah, or you can come sit here by me, well, there's no microphone here, but.
Yeah, so as the,
Just tell them who you are, Steve.
My name is Steve Jelks, and I'm the administrative manager. of
I know
Public
you are.
Works.
Should.
So as city manager, I mentioned, we're going to be the recipient of a stormwater grant through CDBG-DR funds in the amount of $175,000. The county is going to take the project management. What we have to do is we have to supply a scope. The work that David spoke of earlier was specifically for city assets. However, this one, we might want to consider, well, do we want to take the data that we have from our stormwater plan from 2015 and take the data that we have from the vulnerability assessment? Because, again, we can get pretty close to where we know there's residential flooding from where there's problems in the city, and have somebody determine what projects can we do to identify, okay, these are where the problems are, what projects can we do that might help. So we have to send over a scope of work to the county. We want it to be something that's feasible, something that's affordable. We can identify the projects, like the city manager had mentioned, specifically something that'll help the cul-de-sacs up near Alabama, so that we can specifically say, we want you to focus on that. If we have any other specific areas, we can. Or we can use flooding data that we know some of the areas that flood, and say, okay, while you're looking at this, if there's any way that we can address these areas, please identify them in the study. But that's something that we can put in the scope of work.
And now, Steve, how long do you think the study is going to take?
That I don't know, because we haven't gotten off of we haven't done the first step yet. Typically, you would either have an engineer or somebody, and you might be able to get an estimate from them, or you find out kind of at a pre-construction meeting, okay, what are we looking at? In this case, I wouldn't think any more than 6 months.
Okay.
Well, it seems prudent, since we have the data from the first study that went citywide. Now we have this data that was mainly focusing on city assets, but the city assets are throughout the entire city. So now we have new data based on projections, based with the data of the people that are here in the room, that their house is flooded. We know where their house is flooded. And it seems like you could layer those maps on top of each other with someone at Mead Hunt's going to do this and say, okay, this is the hot spot right here, 123 Main Street is the hot spot.
An example that I like to use is in the vulnerability analysis, we're going to be looking at, or we looked at a lift station serving up by the dog park, and in the dog park itself, they're both city-owned assets, but that's right next to Alabama, which is right next to the cul-de-sacs. We kind
Right.
of know what's happening up there.
Right. I mean, we know where the flooding is.
Right.
Based on the last 4 years, we know which residences are flooded. So it makes perfect sense to not start from ground zero. Take this data we have, layer it on top of each other and go, listen. And I would like to see, all the major flooding areas. If one guy at the end of the cul-de-sac flooded in this neighborhood, maybe that was poor planning. But if the whole neighborhood flooded, that's what we need to focus on, the cost-benefit analysis. And then tell us where the bad flooding appears, and give us proposals to fix it. We might not be able to fix that one individual house over here, but if we can save 17 houses over here, we're going to save those 17 and maybe buy that guy's house.
And that is something that you're absolutely right, and I think folks are aware of. There might be situations that the recommendation of the engineer would be acquisition or individual home elevations and that sort of thing, and there's not going to be an answer that, well, all we have to do is put in a gate here.
Right.
It's not going to do it.
And some of these solutions, like you said, aren't going to be easy, some are going to be uncomfortable, and they're all going to be very expensive. When we met with the county manager, when you look at the city from a 30,000-foot level and then start zooming down where you see the flooding areas are, it's like, well, there's a retention pond here, and it's the same elevation as this neighborhood over here, and every time it rains, this neighborhood gets flooded out, and it's Tracy's neighborhood. So what can we do? Well, the county engineer says, well, you should just make that a giant retention pond. Well, there's 40 houses there. How do you just do that easily? And so if we were planning a future community, we could do it, but it's going to be slow, expensive, and painful, in my opinion.
Well, I think I want to, maybe Antoine or David or somebody can kind of follow my comment up. Our retention ponds are simple retention ponds to hold the capacity of water from their property. they're mostly water quality type retention ponds. So they're not designed to take on these 12, 13-inch in a 24-hour period rainstorms. They're just simply not designed for that. They're designed to hold some water for the purpose of water quality so that it percolates down and doesn't contaminate the,
And I understand that with the meetings we've been to, but maybe the simple solution is you now berm those retention ponds, water quality retention ponds, and you pump the water into there, so our whole issue is it's a capacity issue. We gotta hold this water till the tide goes out and hold it in something that's not affecting someone's house. But with the lining, with the, regrading of some of these canals, rather than they're like this, they're all silted in, chop them down, make them straight. Now you've doubled or tripled the capacity of that holding tank, which is a canal. So, you looking for any direction? I think we're all on the same page.
No, the staff is going to work on putting together the scope unless you have something specifically now that you say, hey, make sure you include this in the scope. Make sure you address that. Let us know if you have concerns, and we'll try to build it into the scope of services.
Are we getting any closer to like looking at cleaning the canal, redesigning the canals to work better? Are they gonna work better? Or is that, have we gotten to that point yet of, we have some canals that don't even exist anymore. Well, not canals, but swells that don't really exist anymore.
The major canals through the city is the LPGA canal, the B29 and the B7.
Yeah.
And those are all very maintained. So the city manager referred to some of the choke points that are in there.
Yeah.
And even some of the other areas where they're not obvious choke points, there is some capacity that can be built out, but just by kind of taking out the sedimentation on the sides.
Yeah.
So those are the major canals. There's going to be swales all throughout the city that.
There used to be, me and Joe meet on Mondays, and I've told him that, when I grew up here, and in the 60s, and I think it was almost into the late 70s, middle 70s, they stopped maintaining them, but there was a lot, how Palm Coast, if anybody's familiar with Palm Coast, they have it's really not comfortable, I know, to a lot of the residents, but they have culverts underneath their driveways, and their ditches are all running all over the place. If you've been up there, you know it. And Holly Hill had a lot of that here. We had a lot of it. And, of course, over the years, the city stopped maintaining them, and they turned into yards. Some of these driveways still have them underneath them, and probably don't even know they're there. And I know nobody really does it. And we have some of them still around. Some of them are still around here and there. I don't know if they're going into our stormwater now still, if some of them end up there. I know some of them do, because when I worked here, I said, oh, that's some of the old ditch that we used to have. It is going into the storm, and, and that's going into regular drain, road drain. But I'm just curious. This can go on forever, but Holly Hill's always been wet. It's just we never built on it. Everything over in the Alabama area. In all seriousness, when I was 12, 13 years old, we hunted that. Literally, there were deer over there and everything else. It was wet. But that's beside the point. What I'm just trying to get at, are we getting any closer to knowing that it helping these ditches any, to go and get a backhoe, or not backhoes, I think ditch witches are the best option. Is it gonna help? Would it help any at all to start trying to maintain them at all? And maybe even clean up some of the ones that we don't even really know exist, that are just there.
I think that's part of Joe's long-term plan, is that if we can go back and there's records that show where these ditches were, these swales. And when Antoine retires, we talk about bringing in a stormwater manager, that their job would be to go back and recreate those swales in the ditches. If we have to go buy a Gradall or whatever a Spider or whatever that stuff is, if we have to buy it and budget it, that's what we're gonna have to do, because let's just say the swale was down your street 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And now your neighbor's filled his in, and 3 guys down has filled his in. It doesn't work anymore, and it all contributes to the whole process. And it didn't happen overnight. It happened where that house was sold, And the lady didn't like the pitch, so she hired 5 yards of red dirt, and now the pitch is like this, and the next guy did this, and this, and this. And all of a sudden, it doesn't exist, and we really didn't have any way to reclaim that, but that's in our city right away, and we have every right to go in and reclaim it. So anything we can do, like Joe says, it might not help that individual house, but if we're half of the system, the county's half the system, we're half the system, and if our half of the system doesn't exist, and those arteries are fully clogged, it doesn't help the whole system.
'Cause there's a ditch line that runs from, I think it's not, well, there's Birmingham, and then there's Selma, that runs all the way through down by Kansas, the little cut road Kansas, and runs back behind UB's property and all the way down
Kansas.
there.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know if we've ever maintained that at all. But there's a few of those that are kind of like back, they're gone anymore. They're grown over. And I know that one's split up, because I had the house, we grew up for a little while on 1700 Birmingham, and that was a ditch right there on the side of our property that went, and then it went into stormwater, and then it resurfaced on the other side of Center, had another ditch line. So, I mean, they're around. I think the other thing is over here, in between 6th and 8th Street, there's a ditch line that runs back.
Runs back behind my house.
Yeah, back behind your house. So
That
I mean,
is
they're all-
very overgrown.
Yeah, they're all over the place, I mean, that are there to connect. Is there a way we can get back to connecting them?
And then,
If we gotta redig them up and
So again-
reconnect them and get them flowing and.
The county will tell you that those are mosquito control ditches, and they're designed to hold water where the mosquitoes will go, and then they'll control the mosquito population in those control ditches.
Yeah,
So they're not really designed as conveyances of stormwater.
but they didn't always connect? I
No,
mean, do
they,
you have any
it
elevations?
does go to, that particular one does go out to the Halifax, the Nova Canal.
Yeah,
and then the county will also tell you that the difficulty they're having with maintaining some of their ditches is
Can't get them.
access. That the right-of-ways aren't there anymore, and it's, well, let's get the equipment.
let's get the equipment to
And I-
ride down in there. and
I think we need to strike while the iron's hot. There's the county,
Yeah.
one of their, out of their meeting the other night, one of their 6 priorities was to clean and maintain all of their ditches. So,
And that's some of what Joe and I have been talking about, that when the stormwater manager is hired, they'll have a team, and we can begin to maintain, reclaim some of the basins and the ditches and the culverts, and begin maintaining those. And all of that as a whole, with other projects that we may find out through the study, it's all going to piece together to help mitigate. We will never, 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 never get rid of flooding.
No.
Never.
Won't happen.
My goal for the next almost 2 years is to mitigate. I want to do whatever we can possible to mitigate as much as we can. And that's pretty much where I'm at.
Do we have to have permission to maintain any of the, not just maintain, but to do whatever we have to do to the county ditches?
Yeah, we don't
We
want
can't touch-
to,
we
we don't
don't-
want
we
to
don't
take
wanna
on
take that
that
on.
responsibility. We just want to hold them accountable for that.
So which ones are county, the ones you just explained to me?
Well, yeah, the large ones are B29, B7, and LPGA, so one of them is the one you'll see down by Grove Avenue.
Yeah.
Behind the park,
That's county? That
That's
one?
7, and 29 is up towards the top of the city, and then LPGA Canal obviously right through.
What about some of the smaller ones that I was just talking about? Like the one down through Alabama,
There,
Kansas? and-
well, the Kansas ditch, I believe, is ours to maintain, but the one that's between 6th and 8th Street, that's a mosquito control hand ditch.
What about the one that runs all the way through Bishop's property, all the way down?
That's the northeast,
Railroad tracks?
it's the B7 ditch, and that's a county maintained.
That's county maintained too? What about the one over by, that cuts through, like back behind you and goes all the way through Center down to?
That's a county-
That's the county.
Mosquito
county
control
too?
hand ditch, yeah.
But also along those lines, Joe, I still think we need to hold their feet to the fire for those. That, I don't see how they could possibly get to that ditch to control mosquitoes.
Well, that's why it's called a hand ditch, is because they're supposed to go in there manually and clear things out.
They're not manually cleaning anything out. It's
Dude.
too overgrown.
Yeah.
There's no way they can accomplish
And-
that now.
And they know it, you know, they
We
know
just
it.
need to hold their feet to the fire to get these things cleaned up.
Agreed.
I agree. I think we're all on the same page. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else we need to talk about, Joe?
No, that's all for me.
So, in the spirit of transparency, we have 2 hours dedicated for this workshop. Like I said in the beginning of the workshop, we don't allow audience participation, but I'm going to take a liberty with the approval of the commission, that anyone that's here, would allow you to address the commission for 3 minutes, if you want to, where it's 5:37, so based on how many people are here, we should still be out of here by 6, if anyone wants to take me up on my offer. Anyone opposed to that from the commission?
No.
I'm not opposed.
Tracy?
Tracy Anderson.
Oh, let me set my timer. Hold on. We don't have a clerk.
Well, we have a pseudo clerk.
Yeah, but he doesn't know how
I'm
to
not
use
going to
it.
talk that long.
Okay, go. Go.
Tracy Anderson, I live in the flooded land. I've been flooded 3 times since the Mirage group got there. And it's not a pond, it's a lake. You can look on any site. It's called Rainbow Lake, and they advertise it with beaches, and they advertise that you can have lakefront property. I have lake property, which means I live in a lake. And I'm telling you, I just got back to my home after 3 months. And if you've never been flooded, I don't wish it on anybody, but it's a horrible, horrible thing. When it rains really bad, we worry about it flooding. Doesn't even need to be a hurricane. Something has happened. When our street is lower than the lake, whoever did the study did not pass math. Water goes down to the lowest point. And they should have figured that out, but they didn't figure that out, so that was a waste of a study right there. My question is this: I like what I heard tonight, but my question is, like I said, FEMA's only going to pay for our homes for so long that we have insurance. And then we're out. When you talk about assets to the city today that you showed on the map, your biggest asset are your people that live here. That is your biggest asset, and please do not forget that.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else want to come up? Are you ready for dinner? Raise your hand, okay? That's okay, it's only 3 minutes.
Danielle Latonia, 904 Newcastle Court. Thank you for having the workshop. Sorry I was late. Couldn't get out of work before 4 o'clock. But, some of the stuff I heard, I was excited about. Some of the stuff I heard, I've heard 100 times. You know, I know the ditches, the culverts, the this, the that. The county owns it, the city owns it. We gotta do this, we gotta do that. We're approaching on June, like right around the corner. And if you drive up Flemish, there's a beautiful RV park that's being built, and it's 4 feet up above the sidewalk, of the street. But all the way down Flemish, you can barely see any culverts there. And I believe the city owns those, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's one source of 3 feet of water that could be held 2 miles long instead of in people's homes. All the way down Center Street, you can barely see any of the culverts. I know the ditches, the culverts are only about this wide, which is insane in 2025 with the amount of growth like you were talking about that Holly Hill has been at. It's like, I don't know if it's more than 8 inches in diameter, which again, definitely need it bigger, but at least in the meantime, there are some preventative things. If you want to get the equipment, I'll go out there, because there's an 80-year-old man that literally every storm, I see him out there with a 5-gallon bucket and a shovel to keep the one that's really nice. You could notice driving down Flemish, because he goes out there to prevent his house. And the last thing I'm going to say is I understand our 80-year-old system, or this, or that, and everything else. But we keep building, allowing more people when we haven't fixed our drain. more people using it, more people using the toilets, more people showering, more people doing washer and dryer. That's all being affected. And the last thing I'm gonna say is, I understand our city, our Holly Hill is like way down here, but all these new houses aren't flooding.
And
Behind us, from 2009, the very first flood that we had, behind us, not one of those houses had flooded since 2009. All of the Mirage and all these other places that are being built have not flooded. So it's not just the issues that are being talked about. It's the building and the lack of some maintenance that can definitely, miles of 3 feet ditches can hold in a lot of water.
Thank you.
I agree with that.
Anybody else? Oh, wait, you got to come up, give us your name and your city.
605 Orchard Avenue. I'm just on the other side of College Grande.
Okay.
A couple of houses down, and you get one. So, question, when you guys go to Volusia County, all of those houses that are going in Williamson, Clyde Morris, LPGA, not housing, monstrous apartment buildings, were all, that was all water and, I mean, it's just flooded in there kind of thing. Now they're building it up multiple feet. That water's gonna, I guess in my mind, gonna come back to Holly Hill kind of thing. What does the county say or Daytona say about to you guys when you ask, or do we ask?
We are, it's intergovernmental cooperation. The canal system basically goes down Nova Road, north and south down Nova, then east and west. We are the main thoroughfare for LPGA, and then Big Tree, am I correct? Reed Canal, and then it gets down into Port Orange. So there's not that many outlets, and we are concerned about, the question has been asked, is all the stuff on the west, where's it going? Is it being pushed farther west? Is it being retained there till it goes in the ground? I believe some of it's coming to us. I'm not an engineer, but that's what Mead and Hunt's going to do on all these things. The engineers are going to be working not just in Holly Hill, they're going to be working on the entire east coast of Florida, because we're not the only ones having this. And when we talk to the county and you look at it, not to make an excuse, but there are a lot worse cities in Volusia County than Holly Hill this past storm. So we're working on it, but it is, you can't just, if we solved every problem we have in Holly Hill and flood-proofed everything in Holly Hill, we would still flood because all the other water comes to us. We can't put up a wall and stop the water from coming through our system, so.
Well, you didn't call me, but
I think I was next. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commission. Just quickly, I was going to try not to say. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Chris Villa, 1711 Aniston Avenue. I haven't done this in a long time. It's been a long time. But just quickly, I wanted to say to my neighbors, I hear you, and there's no bigger frustration than having your actual house flooded now multiple times. And so there's nothing that will take that away. But what I do want to express is a thank you to this commission and to the city for taking this on. I know that they're not closing their eyes to this. I think what it is, obviously, is a funding issue. If funding was unlimited, we could do, like you said, we could build a New Orleans-style wall, and then have all of these pumps, like Commissioner Johnson was talking about, and get it all out. Now, where I'm going with that is, flooding has always, and I said this to you recently, flooding has always been a localized issue. If something floods, well, the city or wherever you're at in Florida, that city needs to take care of it. This is becoming, now I have more time on my hands. I'm listening to a lot more city government meetings from all over the county, and especially our county meetings. As you said, Mayor, this is not just a Holly Hill issue. This is not only a Volusia County issue, it's a Florida issue, and especially down south in Florida as well. Why? Things are changing, right? And whether it's the building, whether it's the rising of the sea, where I'm going with this is becoming less of a local issue and more of a state issue. And I'm telling you that our state legislators are aware of this, and they are going to, what's going to happen? They're going to start giving more funds available. So I would just implore this commission, because I plan on living here in 2070, hopefully. I don't want my house that I hopefully have paid off by then to be underwater, and it's very close. You know where my house is, and my garage and laundry room flooded, as you all know. So not as bad as them, but if it gets worse, my property is affected. And so we need to be leaders on this. Stay on the county. Thank you to the mayor and to your staff, Joe, for staying on the county about this. And then the things that we can pick off, like Commissioner Delanoy is talking about, let's look into those swale systems again, because every inch that we could take down, every quarter of an inch, the things that we can bite off, let's do that, and then let's go and beg for some money. And I'll volunteer myself as a citizen to help go to Tallahassee and talk to whoever I need to talk to try to bring those funds home. But I just want to thank you guys, and I just want to, I feel you, I feel it. Let's keep working together, because we have to come together to solve this. This is an issue that we all care about and we're all invested in. So thank you very much, Commissioner. That's all I have to say.
Oh, that was perfect timing. Was there a clock going on ahead?
You had time.
Anybody else want to address us right now? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close audience participation, and this meeting will be adjourned.
Thank you.
Let's see, we